we'll get started. I'm respectful of everybody's time tonight. I want to introduce myself. My name is Pamela Vallejo, and I am one of the 2 in-home trainers. And
I'm Amy Cunningham. I'm the second in-home trainer.
There's 2 of us, which is very exciting for me. For a long time, there was just 1. But we're so glad that you're here this evening. As you may know, you may have been at some of our previous trainings. If, can I borrow that?
Absolutely.
You're awesome. You're so awesome. As y'all received when you came in, these are all the trainings that we've had throughout the year. And then we have a few left in February, April, and May. We're excited about our February one. It's going to be regarding the sensory diet and how we can help children with their sensory needs. And that one will be with an OT from Garland ISD, who will be presenting for us regarding sensory issues. And that one will be at Stevens Elementary in Rowlett. So we have kind of traveled throughout the district this year to different campuses, hopefully make it more convenient for people to attend. And then the one that we will have, we also are doing potty talk one more time, my favorite topic in January. So that will be at Cisneros from 1 to 2:30. Then we have self-help and social skills. That will be at Cisneros in February from 8:30 to 10. And then we will have our last evening one at Carver Elementary, which is kind of south Garland area off of I-30. And then we'll talk about summer resources, and Ms. Cunningham and I love that one, and we are the presenters at that one, and we love to talk about what you can do in the summer to continue routines, things to help your children so that we have a wonderful summer, because we say kind of like tag, you're it, and we give them back to you in the summertime. And so we try to give you some ideas of things that you can do for the summer with your kiddos. And then we will have our last one, our self-help skills, and that one will be at Cisneros in May from 1 to 2:30. So we do the same presentation twice in 2 months. Hopefully that will get people either coming in the morning or afternoon, depending on your schedule. We also do have an Autism 101 class that we offer the first of the month. If anyone is interested in that and feels like that would be beneficial, just talk to Ms. Cunningham or myself. We do enroll you in that class because it's a small group setting, and we have our school psychologists join us, and we talk about, specifically concerns with autism, trying to help you guys understand autism a little bit better, especially for our families that are newly identified with autism. And we have those at Parsons Pre-K Center. So grab us after the meeting if you are interested in that. And those are the rest of our presentations. As you saw when you came in, we have all of our presentations on a YouTube channel for special education, and you can go to that and you can find us in YouTube in all our glory. I'm telling you, it's great. And we have corresponding handouts. If you watch a YouTube video and you're like, hey, Ms. Vallejo, Ms. Cunningham, could you send me that? We would be happy to send that to you as well. Because we're trying to really help everyone, educate yourself on the different areas that y'all are dealing with to try to make things work better for you, especially at home, but also at school and out in the community. So this is where we're at. We're so excited to have you here tonight. This is a dear friend of mine, and this is Robin Balderson. I met Robin 8 years ago in an ARD. And Robin has been with us. She's been in education for 24 years. And 10 years as a teacher, and 14 as a diagnostician, and now she's a facilitator at Hudson Middle School. So she's had a lot of experience in elementary and middle school, lots of experience. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary education, a master's degree in special education, and administrative certification. And she's also trained in dyslexia instruction. And she's taught both general education and special education in her public and private schools in Texas and Massachusetts. Also taught undergraduate and graduate level at Texas A&M Commerce. We call you an adjunct professor, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
I quit that now when I went back to school again.
So she's giving back because she's teaching and training our future diagnosticians and facilitators, and so we're really grateful for that as well. Her husband, he teaches in GISD. and she lives in GISD.
Don't tell anybody.
And she has 2 beautiful daughters. And one of them is a senior this year, and so she's kind of having a hard time with that, but she'll get through it. And her younger daughter is in middle school at Hudson Middle School. So mom's around now. Is that a good
Mom's
thing?
always been around.
Well, I know, but really up close and personal.
She was here the whole time.
I know she was.
She can't get away. Yeah.
So she can't get away from her mother, so.
I don't
Anyway,
volunteer at church ever with the youth because of that. They don't want me anywhere near any other activities. It's terrible.
the one thing that I take from Robin is how much she cares about our kids. And she makes a point with all her parents when she's in an ARD to make sure that you're comfortable and your questions are answered. And if you have concerns, she addresses those. And that is just goes above and beyond. So I appreciate her very much, and I love to work with her. And I'm very grateful tonight that she came, and her presentation, I hope, will help you guys understand the ARD process a little bit better, the IEP, and why we do all those things. With our gentleman who's recording for us tonight, if we can, if it's possible, let Robin get through our presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, we will take all the questions that you have. So thank you so much for coming tonight, and Robin, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Good evening. Before I forget, when Ms. Vallejo mentioned the autism things that GISD offers families, this is not a presentation about autism, but I do want you to know that in all those years of experience, I do tell people I meet every day, move to GISD as fast as you can, if they have a child with autism. And I really strongly believe that. I am very pleased with what we do with autism specifically. I think that when I talk to friends who are in other districts and talk about their children with autism, and I say things like, what about, and they always look at me like, my district doesn't do any of those things. And so those Autism 101 and all those things, that is how I met Ms. Vallejo. Her kind of primary focus was autism and doing in-home parent and training. And when I would say to my friends, you need to get in-home training. And so a girl goes into an ARD and asks for it, and they all look at her like she asked them all to give blood at the table. When I'm like, it is part of the law, just so we're clear, go back and ask again. So I just want to say that if you are a parent with a child with autism, I just absolutely believe you're in one of the very best places in the state of Texas, especially for autism. I strongly believe that, and I don't want to forget to tell you that. So anyway, I'm glad to be here. It's a little weird to be here, though, too. I worked in this building for 14 years, and I'm not going to lie to you, I can tear up even just talking about it. So that's terrible. And I just moved. This year, I left Armstrong after 14 years, and like Ms. Vallejo said, my families and my kids are really important to me. And so just kind of standing here tonight, it's hard. So I'm kind of home, but I'm not. So anyway, this is a wonderful elementary school, and missing it tonight standing here, so please bear with me. Why special education? I don't know. People always ask me, why do you care so much? I don't have a child with special education in special ed. I don't have a sibling. No one in my family ever had any kind of learning differences. I excelled in school. My kids excel in school. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it is absolutely I eat, breathe, and drink special education. And teaching those classes at Texas A&M, I had a little girl come up to me at the end of class, one of the very first nights I started teaching there, and she said, by the way, I think you were my 4th grade teacher at Abbott Elementary. She said, which hit me kind of in the face. She said, you're awfully excited about special education. And I took it as a compliment, but then when I went home that night and laid in bed, I think what she was really saying is, you're kind of a nerd. But I still took it as a compliment. So I laid in bed last night, and all of a sudden I got kind of nervous about coming, and I talk all day long about special education, so it kind of surprised me. And I laid in bed and thought, oh my gosh, what if no one comes tonight? How embarrassing is that going to be? And then I thought, oh my God, what if people do come? What's going to be worse? And of course, then I did what everybody does who's asked to do a presentation after their long work day. I thought, oh, I hope it pours rain all day tomorrow on the one day that I have to get in and out of my car at multiple locations so that I can be sopping wet most of the day and then come straight to see you guys tonight. So that is why the hair is pulled back and looks wet, because it probably is still wet, to be honest with you. So anyway, I love this visual. if you're on social media, you probably have seen this. That's where I saw it the first time, was on Facebook, I'm sure. And because I'm not a stalker, but I am very, I like to read about school. I like to read about special education. There's a lot of groups on social media, organizations, parents with kids in special ed. There's a lot with autism. And so I'm always requesting access to those, and they always make you ask all these questions. And they're like, are you a parent? Are you a child? And I'm like, I don't know, no, I'm just a stalker. I just like to hear what people are saying, and I think it's where I got this. But I just think this is such a good visual, and I think people don't understand. They think, oh, fair, right? Everybody gets the same thing. But that's not really what special education's about. And so I just really like that picture. And I know it didn't print well, but that just kind of tells me what we're doing and why we're doing it and what it's really about. And it's really more about equity, right? Not equality. Okay? So Miss Vallejo kind of introduced me, so I won't spend too much about that. Told you. The other thing that has really made me very passionate about special education is, you know, whatever you do for your job, your profession, I hope and pray that you've been gifted, that you actually enjoy what you do every day. I know my father has told me my whole life, that's really the only blessing, is that as long as you wake up every day and enjoy or get to do what you love, it doesn't matter how much money you make, it doesn't matter about all those things. So considering how much I love my job, what started hitting me the most is how many parents say the words to me, it's the worst day of my life every year. I dread this day every year. I keep reading that from parents. If they don't say it to my face, I read it on those sites I'm on. And boy, then you think, oh, God, people dread to come see me every day, but yet it's what I love to do every day. And so that's really hit me, as even though I'm not a parent of special needs, that's why it's so important to me that my goal is that parents leave maybe not feeling as bad as they did when they came in. Because honestly, if you think about it, the kind of job we do, I don't spend a lot of time focusing on children's strengths, do I? Even though they all have them. If you think about an IEP, special education, we're pretty much only talking about all the things your child can't do. And I know that is how you all dreamed that your children's lives would be. I mean, they all came out right there in delivery room, right? And you said to your husband and to the doctor, I hope we get to know the diagnostician when he goes to school. Isn't that what you all thought and dreamed for your children when you had your children? So the other thing I don't like is when parents say, I always feel like it's them against me. They're not on my side. And I started thinking, sides? Why are we on sides? I thought we were all on the child's side. We're not on the school side. We're not on the parent side. We're supposed to all be there for the child. And so those are the kinds of things that have just stuck with me as I've grown in my profession and my job. And to be honest, I have learned just as much from the families I've met. Again, you saw how families have been very important to me in my career, and I have learned just as much from them as I hope they have learned and gathered from myself as well as other people. So the other thing I hate about special education is that even if English is your first language, probably a lot of parents say I might as well be speaking Chinese in the ARD meeting because they don't have any clue what I'm talking about. And we use a lot of acronyms. And it's very easy when you get comfortable with those acronyms to always use the acronyms, and the parents are just looking at us. And then this year alone, even a counselor that is in GISD, I realized that even people on the general education side don't know what any of our acronyms mean either. The lady, they were making a referral, they were concerned about a child, and they really wanted us to look at autism, but they didn't write that. They said full FIE. And so when I went back to the counselor, I said, well, what disability are we suspecting? And she goes, what do you mean? I asked for a full FIE. And I said, but I mean, do you think he has a learning disability? And she said, yes, a full FIE. And she just kept saying it. And then a minute or two later, she said, yes, we think the child might have autism. And I go, whoa, what? And she goes, I asked for a full FIE. And so we had a whole lesson on, that just means a report. A report we're going to write is called an FIE. And so that lady has worked in education and had no idea what FIE really meant. So I know that it's like a foreign language. And I have seen some really great handouts about this. Alphabet, special ed education, alphabet soup. I swear I have a master of that anywhere. I looked for the last week for that and couldn't find it. But if I find it, I'm going to ask Ms. Vallejo, since she's going to put all these things somewhere where you can access them, I'm going to ask her to include that because it's really wonderful. It was basically just like a little 2-page glossary, but it says special education alphabet soup. And it kind of broke down all those acronyms. And for the life of me, I could not find that in the last week, right? Again, when you are in one place for 14 years and you have your files in one place and then I've moved, I keep calling my paraprofessional here saying, can you check one more time and see if I left that there? I thought maybe I left it here. I couldn't find it. So, but you could probably even maybe yourself find that and Google it because I do think that also supports parents, okay? So in Texas, we're kind of funny. I'm proud to be a Texan, though. I want you to know that. But all the words and terms we use, a lot of them only have to do with Texas. So that's not confusing at all when you have to call another state and ask for records on a child, and you say, I need the last ARD, and the state of Minnesota says, what are you talking about, ARD? I don't know what you want. I'm like, the child's in special education, and we go around in circles when I was first starting because I didn't really know that. So most people, most states refer to the entire document as the IEP, and they even usually call it the IEP meeting. And in Texas, we just like to do things differently. We call it the ARD meeting, right? And at the ARD meeting is where we write the IEP. So that's different than most all other states, which just makes it more confusing oftentimes, especially if you're on those sites to support parents with special education and things, and they're from all over the country, and so everyone's using different words, and you don't know. So I wanted you to know that. I think there's a lot of myths and facts about special education, so I just started writing down things that over the years I've heard parents say to me. I have literally had a parent say, will this cure my child? And sadly enough, that was a parent of a child who had Down syndrome. And that was early on in my career, and I do remember saying, sir, who's your pediatrician? Because you need a new one. If no one's told you that's not going away. But so, believe it or not, if it's on this screen, somebody has said that to me in my 14 years of working in special education. So, just to be clear, it's not a cure for a disability. It's not a perfect science because every child is different. And so even what we think might work doesn't always work. So do things have to be tweaked? Do things have to be amended? Yes, that's not always a bad thing. That means they're actually in tune with your child and have noticed that document isn't the way it should be, and don't just let it sit and ride until the next year and say, that plan, it really wasn't good. So it should be having to be changed sometimes. It happens, and especially the younger the child is, more changes happen because they change and grow so fast in those early years of intervention. And sometimes you just can't wait a whole year to talk about progress because you'll have nothing to work on sometimes when they make progress really fast. So you meet more often. That's not a bad thing. Special education is a service, and that's not a location. And I think back in the day, our mindset was if we heard the word special ed, that meant the kids that stayed in that classroom by themselves all day at the end of the hallway, and no one made eye contact with them, and they never left the classroom. And so a lot of parents, when they're hesitant and they hear the word special ed, they'll say, I don't want my child to go be put away in a room. And so that's important to know that it's a service, it's not a location. And some of the stigma from many years ago that might have been true, things are very different now. And what's appropriate for one child isn't appropriate for another. Also, as I've gone to middle school, I get phone calls from parents all the time, and I'm like, I don't recognize the name, which they're all new names, but I'm looking and I'm going, sir, are you sure the child's in special education? I don't see his name. Yes, he has an IEP, and then I go investigating, and he's actually under Section 504. And so I've really learned too, parents don't actually usually even understand, and they don't know, they just know there's something going on in their special papers, is what I've figured out. You do not have a 504 plan and an IEP at the same time. So I've even had parents say, oh, he's both. Well, probably not, but we have to dig a little deeper. And so that's something that has come up. And then this at the bottom is not to say the school can say no to you. But I do want parents to really understand that just because you say, I want my child evaluated and I think he has X, Y, and Z, means that everybody just stops what they're doing and jumps and does it right away. There needs to be a process. There needs to be multiple sources of data, not just your input, the teacher or the daycare worker, or if they are in school, there's so many sources of data. And the reason why we do that is not because we want to say no, it's because it is very serious to put a child in special education. It should be the last resort. And that's not to mean that special education isn't absolutely the best thing to ever happen for some children, but it isn't the end-all be-all. And you don't want your child in special education if that is not appropriate. And that's hard to understand sometimes, but you also need to actually be suspecting that there is a disability. And sometimes we shy away from that word, and so parents are like, well, can't you do some tests and just tell me if there's nothing wrong? We're not really there to fish and sort out. We only really want to do evaluations because actually it's very time consuming. It takes your child out of the classroom. It's not something that we do, it doesn't get done in 30 minutes, and it's easy to decide. So then we're removing your child more from the classroom if it's not appropriate. So it should be the last resort. And really, you want educators who err on the side of caution within reason. Because you don't want the general ed teacher, every time there's a child that's showing a slight delay, to panic and say, oh, this one needs special education, and not give your child a chance. Everybody comes from different backgrounds, different experiences, and they all don't develop at the exact same level. So especially in those early years of kindergarten, you can tell right away the kids who've been at home the whole time, and then maybe the one who's been in daycare since they've learned they've had access to some more things, but that doesn't mean that child who hasn't had as much exposure might catch up if you just start give a little jump start as he starts kindergarten. So we like them not to rush and just give your child a little bit of a chance, I think, is important. The other thing is, it's important to remember, special education is to remediate a student's learning who's behind their typical age peers due to a disability. It's not to accelerate a child's performance. I remember teaching at Abbott Elementary in 4th grade, and a girl made a B for the first time in her life in 4th grade science, and the mother said, does she need special education? She's an A student. And I said, whoa. She just refuses to look up the answers in the science textbook because she's never had to actually use a textbook until 4th grade, and she is very smart, and so only the dumb kids have to look up the answers. And so she was just really fighting me on that. But the mother was ready to put her in special education because she didn't make an A, and she knew she was capable of it. That's not what special education is for either, okay? So did we have to work on motivating her a little bit to maybe use her resources that she just never had been taught before because she was kind of stubborn? We did. She made an A after that. Caught her attention though, didn't it? But she certainly wasn't a child who needed to be evaluated for special education because she wasn't motivated to use her resources and things like that. So again, that's something that I've had come up. And this next one is important because you can have a disability and not qualify for special education, okay? Because it's two-pronged. You have to have an academic need. And this is just a basic example of that. There are children, there are many adults we know who probably, if they were in school today, would be identified as having autism now. They're highly intelligent. They're all running Silicon Valley probably in California. They're a little socially awkward, but they're making a lot more money than I am, let's be clear. It clearly didn't impact their learning and educational performance mostly, right? Doesn't mean they don't have autism. There's probably ones that still might have get excited and do some funny things, but he was still quite capable of achieving in this world. So that's kind of a real obvious example, but that's what I mean. You can have a disability and not have educational need, especially as they grow and mature and get older. Sometimes you can see that, okay? And this is important because in our community, I deal with this a lot because we have a lot of families who are blessed to have good jobs with good insurances, and sometimes they get medical diagnosis first and can afford private therapies, and all those things are wonderful. But the doctors are working under something called the medical model. And in public school, we're working under something called the educational model, and they are the same thing. I mean, they are not the same thing, excuse me. So we have parents who come in and say, this neurologist says my child has autism. so you need to say he has autism too. Well, they didn't do any educational testing. They didn't see that your child's IQ is 130 and your child is in the 90th percentile on the MAP test and a straight A student on his report card. They didn't do any of that. They just did, even at that point, they were doing MRIs and looking at differences in the brain scans, and yes, he walks on his toes and he flaps when he's excited, and yeah, I do believe your child has autism. So parents will come in with a little prescription pad, and the MD has signed it and said, this child has autism, and then gets upset when we say, well, we'll do an evaluation. We can see what we're talking about with the characteristics, but it is two-pronged. There's going to be, do you meet the characteristics of that disability, but do you also have educational need? And that's where the educational model is different. That can be confusing for parents. I paid a lot of money to that neurologist, and he has MD behind his name, and no offense, lady, but you don't, right? He's smarter than you, he's smarter than me, he's smarter than you. That's hard for parents to understand, I think, sometimes, and I get that. So they get frustrated when we say, well, hold on, hold the phone. Let's look at what you have, but we'll have to do a little more because we have to do educational testing as well, and he probably didn't. He might ask you some questions, but they don't do, typically, cognitive testing, achievement testing, and all those things to get the medical diagnosis, which is coming from his DSM-5 manual, their Bible. We don't have that Bible. We have different Bible. So that's come up before. So how does the process start? Okay. Most of you probably are here because you've already been through this, maybe in the last year. Maybe you did this 10 years ago, and you could probably talk about this. But let's break it down a little bit. So a referral committee should be meeting to talk about your concerns, the teacher's concerns, and looking at all these data, looking at deciding if something's going on. And the point is, if everyone's in agreement that they do suspect, not for sure, but suspect a disability, they request written consent from the parent. If the parent does not sign, a referral is not made. And you cannot be coerced or forced to sign consent. That is absolutely your right, okay? So if you're in agreement and you give written consent, then we start, okay? So that starts the process. And literally, we have 45 school days. Now that changed 5, 6, 7 years ago. If you've been doing this a long time, it might have been a little tweaked number many years ago. But basically, 45 school days from the day you signed that piece of paper. The evaluation team, if it's a team, if it's just a diagnostician, has to complete the evaluation, look at all of the data, and write a report on all the findings. All of that has to be done by law in the 45. Please notice that word school days. So that doesn't include holidays or weekends. So Labor Day, if it falls in there, you skip over it, it doesn't count. The Christmas break, that one's confusing for people. They think, oh my God, this seems like it's dragging on forever, because we were out of school for 20 days, right? So those didn't count in that 45 school days. It used to many years ago, but it doesn't anymore. When the report is written, now that's the word FIE, it means full individual evaluation. Some people call it a disability report in other states, okay, or the eligibility report, you'll hear. But all of that must be done within the 45 school days and dated and then not touched, okay? Then a meeting is held. And that's where we use the word ARD, A-R-D, okay? That meeting is held to review the evaluation findings. And then a new timeline starts, just so we can keep you confused, okay? From the date of that report, you have 30, and now look at the difference. Calendar days. Now your weekends count, your holidays count. Totally different, right? So if the diagnostician who's writing the report or the speech pathologist who's writing the report dates their FIE 30 days into that timeline, she doesn't take all 45. From the date of her report starts this new timeline. She just, those like extra 15 days just sort of go away. So it doesn't matter. It's from the date she puts on that final report. 30 more days you must have a meeting, okay? And that's where it's called the ARD. And that is where they're going to review the evaluation, determine if your child met the disability criteria, and then the ARD committee decides if special education services are warranted based on that report. and then they might propose a program to you. Okay? This is very important to me. It's important that my parents understand this. Up to this point, they only gave permission to do an evaluation. They've not agreed for their child to be in special education. They've not agreed to just say yes to anything the school proposes. All they've given consent for is for the evaluation to occur and for us to tell you what we found. Okay? Then, if your child does have a disability and we give you a proposal, I think your child should come to speech therapy. I think your child needs help in reading. At that point, as the parent, you then have the right to decide, do I want my child in that program or not? We've told you what we believe is best to make your child as successful as possible, but in the end, push come to shove, you're the parent. You get to decide what's best for your child. And you can also change your mind at any time. Okay? So you may say yes and sign new permission, and they do it for a month, and for whatever reason things happen, I don't know. If you just don't like it, you don't have a good feeling, you can revoke your consent. It is your right. And so that's important to me. I like for parents to make sure when I'm in ARDs, I really always make sure they understand that. So the main purpose is to ensure that we're all working together to ensure the student has success despite the presence of a disability. Again, this IEP is not going to cure what's going on, and it's not even going to guarantee to you ever that your child will ever be at the exact level of his or her peers. Every child's different. Every disability manifests itself differently. We're never going to sit in an ARD meeting and promise, if you just do this for a year, your child's going to be like every other fifth grader. That's not something we're going to ever say to you. We can't promise you that. Will it happen for some? It might. But that's not a guarantee. And I've had parents say, well, how long do you think it'll take for this to make it better? If I knew that, I'd probably make a lot more money than what I'm doing now. So, there's no way to predict how each child will respond to the supports. What works for one and so great, and you're think you're a rock star, and then you say, I know what we can do. I did this one time and it worked, and then you try it with that kid and it's just goes bad fast. And you're like, well, I swear it worked with the last child. It's just like parenting. Parenting's a lot like that too. But the IEP does ensure your child's individual needs will be addressed, and all students will have access to the general education curriculum to the greatest extent possible, which is referred to in the law as LRE. And that means least restrictive environment. And so some people, I think, are confused and think LRE automatically means general ed, general ed, general ed. But my child has the right to LRE. That's general ed, general ed, general ed. And I think that's not what it means exactly. What I believe LRE means is that that's different for every child. To the greatest extent possible means you can put a child sitting in general ed all day and think, but he's being included. But if he's not making progress because he needs to learn it and be taught it a little bit different, is making him sit in general ed with 30 kids every day his LRE? Because if he would make progress, if he went to that special education teacher 30 minutes a day and actually worked on his reading deficits that his third grade teacher isn't even teaching because they aren't teaching children to read, learning to read as much in third grade, they're already reading to learn. He's never going to learn to read if you just keep him sitting in third grade and he's a non-reader, right? So is that really his least restrictive environment? So that's really what I believe LRE means. It's not general ed for everyone. Is that ideal? Of course. Don't you want that to be? Sure. But I firmly believe that there are situations where making a child sit in general ed with 30 kids all day long is actually more harm than good. Because the whole point is if your child learning, that's really what we need. Where's your child going to learn and make progress? So that's something that's important to think about, okay? After we do the evaluation and we give your recommendations, I said the parent gets to make the decision. I'm sorry, I already covered that a little bit. The point is that you have to give written consent a second time for your child to actually be in special education. And of course, I got out of order again there where I talked about qualifying as two-pronged. We think of it this way. You must have the disability, but this is the second piece. But you must also have educational need. Okay? And that's that second question that you have to be able to ask. And then this last thing, I always feel funny when I say this in my ARD meetings, and most of the time the parent looks at me and goes, what are you even saying? I've been begging for this evaluation. No, I don't want to wait 5 more days. Where do I sign? And I always say this, and I'm still not comfortable, and it's been 14 years of saying it, and I always kind of go, okay, I know it sounds so silly, but just give me a minute. What they're saying is, so we give a lot of information in an ARD meeting to parents. And again, think about if English isn't even your first language, and then we're giving you all of this information about your child. And it's been a lot of hard stuff to hear, probably. And I was focused, but I wasn't, right? Kind of, do you ever go to the doctor for important things? My mother was very ill with colon cancer for a blessing only about 2 years total. But I remember never wanting her to go to the doctor alone, because we never thought we would get the whole story when she'd come back. And she would say, I think he said, and so pretty quick we learned somebody, one of my 5 sisters, one of us was always going to go to the appointments from then on, because somebody needed to be able to hear what they were saying while she just sat there and heard terrible things about having cancer and her odds of living and those things. And sometimes we found even 2 or 3 of us needed to go with her. Now, today's world is a little different. I know a good friend of mine, a sweet lady that's taught me most of everything I know about special education. His daughter lives out of state, and she started having a lot of heart issues, and single, she's not married, she's here alone. And so her daughter was smart, and she had worked in the medical field, so she never let her mother go to the doctor that she didn't have her on FaceTime the whole time. So her daughter in Oklahoma could still hear and see everything the doctor was saying, and she was even asking questions. I'm sure the doctors loved that. But because she'd say, Mama, you're not going to remember anything when you get home, and with her medical background, she had a lot of questions very specific about her mother's health she wanted answered, and she never felt like her mother. It's kind of like when you send your husband to the doctor with your children. By the way, that happened today, and I sent a list of all the things I wanted my husband to say, and then I just got an ugly word back and said, if you think I can't handle it, you could always come home and see to her. 22 years of marriage, you know how that goes. But it's pretty typical when the male goes to the doctor, right? So that's what this is like, right? The first time you sat in that meeting, and they used all those acronyms, and they might have well been speaking Chinese, and you don't even know what they said. And now you know all they know is they're pushing paper at you, wanting your signature on something. Or the parents who both planned to come, right, and be a support for each other. And then husband's job had an emergency, and he surprises her 10 minutes before and says, honey, I can't make it. And she's like a deer in headlights. And then we're pushing a piece of paper at her saying, sign here, it's going to be great. That's why this is there. The law says, hold the phone. I just need a minute. And it's okay to say that. I remember when I first started as a diagnostician, and a parent asked me she didn't want to waive the 5 days because she said, I just really think I need to go home. And I thought, oh my God, what did I do wrong? I screwed up. I'm pretty sure I called Harris Hill and said, yeah, my parent said no, wouldn't say yes, She came back 2 days later and said, I just needed to think about it. I just needed to actually go back and see what you said, and it made more sense the second time. So that's really why the law says that you should always have the right to that 5-day waiting period. Okay? It's there, and it's not a bad thing, but I had to learn that even as a dyad, because I kept thinking I was doing something wrong when a parent wanted that 5 days. Now I've kind of reevaluated and went, okay, it's really not that big of a deal. They just want you to give them a minute to breathe and take it home. So that is important, okay? And that's true for any time the school says they think they should do something differently. And it still may be the right choice, and you may actually agree, but it's still okay to say, it sounds really good, and I think you're right, but I just can't go home and sleep on it, and it's okay to do that. And, we give you these lovely packets. Brought these today. It's taken me 14 years to actually read this whole thing through. Every summer, I would take this home and determine that I should probably read this from cover to cover if I'm giving parents and telling them what it's about. And literally every summer I'd get about halfway through it, and I felt terrible, and I'd come back to work and think, yeah, I didn't do it again. And I give this to parents every day after those horrible meetings where they didn't really hear half of what I said, and say, oh, and here's all your rights. Enjoy that. And I always tease them, and I say, and all your free time. And then I say, if you can't sleep tonight, it'll help you. You know, and GISD is awesome. We actually make these available in many languages. I know here in my box I had one in French, I had one in Vietnamese. We actually have been fortunate with our departments here that we have a translation department of our own, and they support us so well with those things. Of course, Spanish and English and Vietnamese are probably the most popular ones we use in Garland, but we do have those. And so I just know every parent runs home and starts reading this as soon as they leave me. Because remember all those acronyms and all that language that we love to do. But these are your rights. So a lot of things I have spelled out for you tonight are the key things that I think stand out in here. Okay, there's lots more, don't get me wrong. But it talks about the timelines that I've shared with you tonight that we actually need to abide by, the things that are your rights. They're called procedural safeguards, which starts to make sense the more you break those words apart and think about it, right? So anyway, the other piece of this that is really important to me, and this happened today where you walk away from a parent and think, yeah, I just don't think they understood what they gave permission for. Even though we used an interpreter and we thought we did all the right things, everybody was well-intentioned, and then the parent showed up for the eval today, and when I just even said the word PPCD, he just looked at me and said, what did we come here for? And I had an interpreter with me, and I went, oh no. So I pulled up the chair. I thought, well, this is going to take a little longer. And he was like, so you mean go to a different, he was just very clear that he wasn't maybe really aware of what we did. And I know the people who met with him, and they had an interpreter, and I know they were well-intentioned and thought he understood that, but English isn't his first language. We had an interpreter. All those things we thought we did right, but then still I thought, and so I was like, wait, interpreter, come back for a minute. We're gonna talk a little more detailed. That's very important in the law. It's called informed consent. You actually need to understand what we're testing for, and we get shy, and we don't love to use the word special education sometimes with parents. It'll just help us figure out what he's doing really well and what he's not doing good at, right? I never said the word special ed. And then they come to the meeting where we talk to the ARD about what we found, and I say something, and he's eligible for special education, and the parent says, special education? We were never talking about special education. Oh, wait, yeah. We don't realize sometimes that what we're doing there. We don't mean to do it even sometimes with our language, but that's important. And I want you to also know that your home language, you have the right to have us get interpreters. It's not just going to be, well, you're in America, sorry, you don't understand all our English. Part of the law says that we have to be able to provide people who can help us communicate with you in your home language. If we can find a person, it's lovely. We have access to things called Language Line, who do some of the, I don't know what the right word is, less common languages that aren't as easy to find a translator in the area, interpreter, excuse me. So we have access to several things to do our best to help the parent make sure they really understand what we're talking about. And I have a parent who's very dear to me, and his third grade baby is still in school here, and she's been here since she was 3, and she's got a lot of medical issues, and she's in the hospital, and things are not going well. And the first time I went to Children's to see him and her, I came upon a doctor talking very fast in the hallway to him. And English is not his first language. And that sweet lady I told y'all that's taught me everything I know was with me. And I immediately said, oh my God, he's not understanding anything they're saying. And I started to go across. And she was like, Robin. And so I said, and he's from a culture that it's very common to do a lot of nodding. And it really makes Americans think he's totally understanding everything we're saying. And they were talking about some very serious medical stuff for his daughter. And I know they thought I was crazy because she was like, are you family? It's very clear I'm not family. They're an Asian family, Vietnamese descent. I said, no, ma'am. She said, well, but I am a strong advocate for this family, and I'm just telling you, he didn't understand a word that man just said. Do you have an interpreter or something? And believe it or not, they make our language line, and our interpreters look terrible. I was so impressed. She said, well, he said he didn't need an interpreter. I go, I know he did, because that in his culture is, he's being respectful. Well, and he keeps smiling and nodding. I go, I know. He's been nodding to me for 8 years. That doesn't mean he understands me when I speak it. And he does. He called me last night from the hospital, and I said again, are they using the language line to help you, sir? You know, don't try not to say his name, I'm sorry. Yes, Miss Robin, I promise. I said, are you sure? Because you know your wife doesn't understand any of that, and I don't want you to have that extra burden. Yes, Miss Robin, they bring the iPad every time now. Okay, just making sure. And I said, you know I'm going to come this weekend and see you, and I'll make sure. I want to make sure. They have an iPad. They use like a FaceTime language line even, so you can see the interpreter too, which I feel like even helps it more. But I just figured if we have to do it, surely the medical world has to do it, right? But I wasn't sure they were taking care of my family, and so they're interpreting every time now that they speak with him. So anyway, which makes me happy. Anyway, my point is, he never asked for an interpreter. Never. I think he does it out of respect. He does have English, but when they were talking about all this hard stuff, and I have basically 3 degrees, and English is my first language, and I don't know a word they said to that man. So that's why that stood out to me. So I keep saying, ask for the interpreter. It's okay. Ask. So I want parents to know that that's important, and hope that they know that. So anyway, we talked about informed consent. I'm sorry. Okay. The last thing about the paperwork was before we jump into it. This paperwork is very confusing. And it's a lot. And the reason that paperwork is like that is because it's what we call all-encompassing. So it ranges, special education ranges for children ages 3 to 21. You might not know that. With a range of disabilities. So is every question in that IEP going to relate to your child? Probably not. Okay? And so that makes it even harder to figure out. Why'd they just say no and move on? Well, they don't know that, well, because your child's 4 coming to speech, and that's talking about state assessment from TEA, which is STAR, and no, it doesn't apply to your child, but it can make it just that much more overwhelming. This document is very global. There are several specific items that must be addressed each meeting by law, and not every aspect of that is applicable to you, okay? But here's what I've done. I've broken it down, and I think there are a few parts that stand out as the most critical to the actual child. And to be honest with you, a lot of the other parts are more clerical. They serve as kind of various data collection points, really for the state. There's a few things about just determining that we didn't just jump the gun and put your kid in special ed, and we actually can prove that it's what your child needs. But it's not detailed specifically about your child. So that's where I went next, was let's break the IEP up. And so we have a couple of things. We have it on the screen, and then Ms. Vallejo, Ms. Pam's, she liked me before this. I did not have this ready for the interpreter, but I brought another handout that I also made my own copies so she wouldn't get mad when I sent them to her last minute. Because it's the pieces of the ARD, the screens of the ARD, that I do believe stand out to you. And a lot of times what I do with parents when I hand them the 42-page document is that they would say, here, have a great day. There's all that stuff about your kid. And they used to stare at me. I tend to do this now. I say, okay, let's start over. I'm going to open up, and I'll open up to the actual meat of the IEP, basically the goals. And I usually put a paper clip and say, these 5 pages. If you go home and your husband or your wife or your grandmother says, what exactly are they going to do with Johnny at school? That's it, right? Because I think in the end, that's the biggest thing. What are they actually going to do with him when he's at school to help his reading? So that's what I've started doing a lot of times, especially the newer people who are new to the process, is I literally open up and kind of paperclip and say, out of all 42 pages, if you only focused on these 8, you're going to be really knowledgeable more than you think. So I do that now. So here's how we'll break it up. The very first screen of the ARD, or the IEP, has several things that are important. Really, it's the first 2 things. And the reason I want to tell you this is because I can't believe how many people, when they come into school, maybe they've moved, and they're coming from another school or another state, and I say, well, and they'll say, my child's in special education. I'll say, well, what is his disability? And they go, he has trouble in school. They don't even know sometimes because again, we're just using all these big words. And so I'm always sad about that because I think, oh, if the parent doesn't know, we're in trouble. So I want you to pay attention to this first page of that packet. And I put stars, okay? The date of the ARD meeting at the top, if you see that, that's the date you came to your meeting. And it's not on the screen, I'm sorry. And I put in parentheses, that's due once every year, which means every year, by that date, you need to meet again and talk about your child. Every year, that date should change, okay? If you go down a little further to the next star, there's that word that we've talked about, full and individual evaluation, FIE. That is due every 3 years. And so what I want you to see is where it says date of report, 1/13/2020, that means that a diagnostician or a speech pathologist or a school psychologist dated this report, the report that said your child had a disability, on January 13, 2020. So the law says that by January 13, 2023, which that's hard to say, that must be redone, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Go down a little farther, there's 2 stars. It repeats it twice. 2 different places it has the child's eligibility. This child that I made up has a speech and language impairment and has a specific learning disability if you look at that packet. It says it again, even one more way at the bottom. That is the very first page of an ARD that you are handed every time you leave the school. That first page has some very important details about your child. But again, even I, who look at this document every day, I see just a lot of words on that page. And so I wanted you to know, if you ever questioning what your child's disability is, if you go to the first page of your ARD, it's going to be right there. And it's going to say it 2 different times even, okay? So let's move on to the third thing. And actually, I lied. I should have had them go to the next screen where I wrote about the FIE date and the eligibility, okay? Because here's what I want to make sure and point out to you. 13 ways to qualify for special education. That's a lot, right? So a child can be blind and be in special education, or a child can have trouble saying his R's and be in special education, and everything in between. So that also kind of proves to you what I was saying about not every piece of this paperwork is going to always apply to your child specifically, because we're supposed to talk about all children ages 3 to 21 with any of these 13 disabilities in this one document. Okay? So there you go. So a lot of people don't know there's 13 ways to qualify, so I have them up there. Obviously, the most common ones might be more typical: speech impairment, a specific learning disability, and other health impairment, which is confusing for some people. These are children who have medical conditions that are so significant it impacts their educational progress, maybe because they miss school all the time. My husband's had a child who was on dialysis, needed a liver transplant many years ago, and she missed a lot of school because of that. So even though her cognition is fine and she was learning like everyone else until she got sick, but now that she's missing school all the time, what do you think happened? She started falling further and further behind. Then she's also getting fragile with medical stuff, and because she's on all these drugs, right? So she can't come to school sometimes in the winter because she can't afford to get sick, so she misses more school and all those things. And so other health impairment can be covering lots of things. Kids with diabetes, yes, kids with ADHD, they do fall under that. An intellectual disability is when cognition is not necessarily where we hoped it would be in the average range or close to it, and so on. But a lot of people are always surprised when I say there's actually 13 ways to qualify. Notice lack of motivation isn't one of them. I literally had a parent one time say, I mean, there's nothing going to drive this kid. He has no internal motivation whatsoever. All of his other siblings did. I don't know what's wrong with him. He must have a disability. I really had a parent at Abbott Elementary say that to me one time. And I was like, oh, sir, lack of motivation isn't a disability under idea of law. but I feel for you. So anyway, so then the next section is talking about the PLAFs that I think is important to the child, okay? And so if you go to the next page of my handout, I've underlined PLAFs because that's a crazy acronym. Again, there's those acronyms. We used to say PLEPs. I literally just started using PLAFs, and I think that's been the term for at least 5 or 7 years, but it was PLAFs forever. So what does that actually mean? It means present levels of academic achievement and functional performance statements. That's a mouthful, isn't it? It's technically the part of the document that some people, it's more the meat. So they start talking, saying the IEP, what your child can do, and what your child's not doing that we wished he could for a child his age. That's what that is. It might include reading, writing, math, the core subject areas that we know. Communication, that's going to be speech stuff, right? Emotional behaviors, functional, and then there is an other section. Not all sections are always appropriate for each student, depending on the need, their age, their grade, their disability. And so, for example, my daughter, when she was 3 years old, actually before 3, she was in ECI. It was when we had our PIP, we called it, Parents in Partnership, which was just a wonderful program that I'm so pleased my daughter was fortunate to be in. And Mr. Burt, my daughter's in 6th grade, by the way, but we still talk about Mr. Burt at my house. Mr. Burt came to my house once a week and worked on her speech, and then he went to the babysitter's house. And then when I decided I better move her to some type of child care facility because she's 2 and not speaking, probably hard to imagine that one of my children wouldn't talk. But it was true, which really was making me crazy. And boy, she was so stubborn, all those wonderful things. Mommy, do the signing times and more, and all my friends' kids, I want more food. And you would go to try to do those with Riley, and she would hold her hands like this and was like, you are not going to make me do those signs. I will not budge. And all she ever said was no and mommy at 2 years old. She was really feisty. So Mr. Burt started with us as ECI. And so he worked on language every week, and we loved him. And then part of the law said as we got close to 3, if she needed to keep doing speech, maybe she needed to go into the public school because it starts at age 3. So she qualified, and so she started coming to speech here. And so she qualified with an articulation impairment. Because believe it or not, this minute I moved her to Blue Ivy, she started talking up a storm. But she couldn't understand a dadgum word she said. She might as well have been speaking Spanish. I had no idea. No one understood a word she said. And she would say, "Ay, hi, hen," for Robin Balderson. I can still hear her. So she qualified with an articulation impairment. But guess what? She was 3 and she couldn't say her sounds correctly. But we weren't talking about her reading. We weren't talking about her writing. We weren't talking about her math. We were only talking about this, and we could have talked about this because, man, she was bad, but we weren't, because that really wasn't why. She wasn't bad because she couldn't say the sounds and words. So all the other things said not applicable. Wasn't because we were ignoring it. It didn't make sense for a 3-year-old coming to speech. So that's what I mean by that, okay? This will include current strengths and weaknesses. And it's important to know that it's the weaknesses that drive everything else that is decided about your child. And I was thinking about that today going, well, we can't write every strength your child has. And really, we shouldn't write every weakness your child has because you can't focus on everything at one time. So that's where those experts in education come in. You're not going to learn to read 2-syllable words when you don't know the letter sounds. So that's what I mean. Those are the experts who know, we're going to worry about that later. Yeah, she can't do it, but all I really needed to know was starting to know her letter names, and she doesn't know those yet. So we think about the foundational strengths tied to the first or 2 appropriate weaknesses that your child should have already maybe accomplished for their age, but hasn't for some reason, which is what the disability we found is the reason usually, right? So we look at that. So on the class, I went ahead and gave you an example. So I made this up. And I did not do one for everything, but I started thinking, okay, so I did a reading one for you to look at. It says it was a 2nd grader who has been identified with a learning disability, and I just wanted you to be able to see what one should look like. His strengths are, he can actually identify all upper and lowercase letters by name on demand, drilling them, what's this, what's this, what's this. He identifies the first 10 basic sight words when drilled repeatedly from a 1st grade Dolch word list. Okay, but he's in 2nd grade. Don't forget that, right? What else? When blending CBC words, so when you're putting a word in front of him like cat, k-at, right? When he blends those sounds, he's actually reading those pretty successfully. The teacher said 70% of the time he can read words like that. However, when you start getting to add blends, and I gave you an example of what that means, because again, there's a big educational word. I don't know what a blend is, maybe as a parent. Or digraphs, suddenly he's not blending those sounds together anymore. So that's like dog Or let's think. Of course, you know, on demand, can't think about stuff like that. But you can read the word at, maybe, mat. But when I put TH in front of it and it becomes that, then she breaks down and she's not decoding the at. Because she's probably going at. And that's not that. Or that's just a basic example. So we now know what she can do, but what's starting to be a problem for her. So we have a strength. Now we have a weakness. And so we said JB needs to work on increasing number of sight words from 10 to 50 from the Dolch word list. Because he's only reading 10. He's not going to learn them all in 1 year. So we have to be reasonable. But we'd sure like him to at least learn 40 more. That'd be a good goal. And start blending those words with blends and digraphs. So right there, the things that I said the child needs to do, if you go to the next page of the handout, you'll see a reading goal, and it's labeled goals at the top. And if you look at number 2, there's the goal. What's it say he's going to do? He's going to learn to decode 1 syllable, CVC words that can include blends and or digraphs. Nobody knows what a digraph is, so that's why we try to make these as specific as possible. And so I hope a parent now knows what a digraph is, so they can kind of get a visual of the kinds of words we're talking about. So we didn't make up this goal out of nowhere, right? It was identified in the PLAF as being a weakness. And if we're in 2nd grade already, guys, and we're not blending any of those kind of short vowel words, that's something we need to start targeting more specifically. So I just want you to know, I'm not going to read all of those to you, but you can see I did a reading example, and I showed you a reading goal as an example. I did a speech example. I gave you a speech goal that tied to it. So you could kind of start to see, this is the meat. This is about your child here specifically. And no one else's is going to look the exact same. And these children don't even go together. I've got a 2nd grader, then I did a goal about ours necessarily. And then I even gave you a math one, and that's totally different because how I wrote that was for any of you parents who start when your child's 3 or 4 years old and you go through an early childhood evaluation. And those are pre-academic skills. Things like counting or the concept of 1. And so then I did a math goal that tied to that kind of PLAF. So I did not write about the same child in each example on purpose because you're all here at different places. Okay, so just to kind of help you. And then I did a short behavior one. It says for a child who has ADHD, just to give you some ideas of things he's done well and he's improved on, and then what he needs to work on, just to give you some examples. So these 2 things really are always tied together. Your PLAFs and your goals, in my opinion, as a parent who's had a child in special education, I have a binder of all the speech meetings. These are the 2 things that should go hand in hand for your child. Okay? If your husband or you go home and somebody says, well, what'd they say? What are they going to do with Johnny at school this year? This is it right here. Okay? And so that's how, so when you get the 42-page packet, when you go on your way out the door, if you could at least line them up with these, exactly, they'll look just like this. Then that's the important stuff in my opinion as I have learned the process. Okay? So hopefully that might help you a little bit. So when you hear the principal say to the diagnostician, we haven't gone over the PLAFs, because they say that to us all the time, everyone's like, now you kind of maybe go, oh, I know that word now, okay? So hopefully that would help a little bit about the goals. Every child has a different number of goals. You might come to an ARD and your child have 2 goals, and then your child might be very significantly involved and have 10 goals. So again, there's no comparing. You don't want to call your friend and say, when you came out of your ARD, how many goals did your child have? We don't compare any of that because every child is so different. So don't panic and go, but I only got 3 goals. What do you mean you got 7 goals? It doesn't work that way, okay? Yeah, so keep that in mind, okay? The last part of the goals I want to tell you is that we are tracking your child's progress on these goals all the time. Every time a speech teacher sits with a child and works on R, they are trained. I drilled 10 words with R, and they literally circle plus minus for each attempt. And then at the end she goes, okay, today we just started this. She got 2 out of 10. But guess what? When she sees her the next week and she does it again, she might have gotten 3 or 4. And again, that's what she wants to see, is that it only gets better. But sometimes it doesn't work that way. We don't always get it right. That's not a bad thing. It just means we got to look at that again. So I want you to know that if the ARD calls you, if they call you from the school and say, I think we need to meet, I think we need to have a review ARD because the math is just not maybe working out the way we thought. Maybe we need more supports in there. Maybe I overshot, especially those little kids. They're so hard to predict. Sometimes my PPC teacher would just have such high ambitions. Sometimes she'd get a little carried away. I'd be like, maybe we should just bring it down a notch. And so sometimes she'd have to come to me and be like, yeah, you're right. I mean, that was a pretty lofty goal, and child's nonverbal, and I thought he was going to rote count to 10 in a year, and she was good, but not always that good. So sometimes she'd come and say, yeah, I think we better call them back. We're not going to rote count by 10. I messed that up. It's okay, so don't panic. But I want you to know that, okay, that sometimes they have to tell you those things, and that just means we're at least in tune and in touch with your child enough to know that we need to reevaluate the plan, okay? The next thing that I think stands out is the accommodations and modifications, and this is a terrible word. It's confusing, and still to this day, every year I end up having to talk to staffs. The principals always say, we better talk about this again. They are not the same thing, and everyone uses them interchangeably. Everyone does. But why wouldn't we? You never see one printed without the other. It's always accommodations and modifications. I don't know why we do that. They are not the same thing. So accommodation means ways to support the child and how they access the curriculum that everybody's looking at. Everybody's doing the same thing. Your child's getting the same instruction as everybody else, but maybe we're gonna accommodate how they show us what they learned. Okay? Modification means changing what? The what. When you hear the word modified, that means your child's not learning or being expected to learn the same as everyone else in their grade level. That is much more serious, just so you know. These are very much not the same thing. We have to, even the schools, be more careful. When we use these words, teachers still ask us all the time about that. So here's something that's come up in middle school this year. A lot of times when children have an attention problem, they can do the same work as everyone else, but man, 20 long division problems might make everyone in that house want to take medication or drink alcohol by the time they're done, right? It's the same skill 20 times. Does it really take the teacher, who's an expert in what they do, to see if that child understood long division by making him do 20? Would she have probably figured it out in 10? Probably, right? It's all 20 questions are long division. It's the same 20 everyone else is doing, right? It's not that the first 4 or 5 only had 2 digits under the house. That's what we used to say when we went to under the house. And then as you went through the page, by the end there were 4 digits. That's not the same skill, is it? Okay. If you're needing to know if he can do 2 digits and 3 digits and 4 digits, yeah, then you do maybe needing to do all 20, or you just need to get smarter in how you shorten that assignment. Maybe you don't just say, okay, Johnny, do the first 10, but you get smarter about your worksheet and you go, okay, I want to test all 3 skills, so I'm going to circle. Johnny, I want you to do the ones I circled. I want you to do 1 and 2, and 6 and 7. Oh, and that last one, 10, because that last one is 3 numbers under the house, and no other problem was like that. Now you're still teaching and expecting him to demonstrate mastery of the same 3 skills everyone else is. Did he still have to do all 20 to do it? No, the teacher just had to get smarter. So in middle school, they keep saying, this child has shortened assignments up to 50%. That means half. That means he's not expected to learn half of my curriculum, so he's on modified curriculum, right? Whoa, what? No, what are you talking about? And so we had this huge ordeal at middle school this year, and my friend was like, okay, we got to talk about this. So I gave that example, and they all went, oh. So you just have to be smarter than your worksheet, right? They give this 2-page math, 6th graders, they get a whole week to do it, front and back. Only complaint, a lot of my 5th grade parents who've come from Armstrong and are at Hudson with me say, the math's going to kill us. There's 40 problems every week. At home, after they did school all day, the meds are worn off. I'm going to kill someone. I thought she got shortened assignments. And the teachers weren't shortening the assignment, maybe, and didn't understand what they were supposed to do. But that came up. That worksheet every week is not all the same material. It's always a cycle review. So the first 2 or 3 problems are one skill, maybe the next 3 or 4 are a different skill. And so the teacher says, but if he only does the first half, then I'm only expecting half the curriculum from him. So I was like, well, here's an idea. Actually, look at the worksheet. And then tell the kid which half of the ones you want him to do. And they all were like, and now no one's complaining about the math homework at all anymore in 6th grade. So that's the difference, though, if that makes sense to you. Modified curriculum, if you're hearing those words, that's much more serious. Okay, that's meaning that the expectation of what your child is capable of doing isn't quite the same as everyone. Is that necessary for some children? It is. But not every child, and you just want to understand the difference because you are having, it's 2 different things here, okay? So this is the goal. If the child can access the same material that all children are being taught with just accommodations, that is absolutely the most ideal situation you can have and still be in special education. Please know that. Accommodations level the playing field. Modifications change the field you're playing on. That's something I read one time and I was like, oh, I like that. So hope that makes some meaning to you. I gave you an example of just some basic accommodations so you would understand what we mean by that, like shortening work. Or this one is very common with little children, pair the concrete objects with abstract concepts. So things that are a lot of language sometimes are very abstract. Time is very abstract for all children, even ones who don't have a disability. It's because they can't touch it, they can't feel it. And I don't think I understood when I was a 1st grade teacher why they made us do 30 minutes of calendar every day. Until now, I look back and go, oh, that's because even my daughter, who our tic isn't impacting her understanding of those things, used to say things like, well, yesterday, or, you know, when the child says, you told me 3 weeks ago we were going to do this, and you told them the day before. And if you're a parent, and you're a smart parent, you've learned to stop saying things like, tomorrow we're going to go to Chuck E. Cheese, because about 2 minutes later, is it tomorrow yet? Is it tomorrow yet? Time is horribly abstract, and I've learned because you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't really see it. But if you start giving them calendars and marking things and Xing things out, in 3 days, and they can see, that's where we start trying to pair something tangible, something concrete that they can see and touch with all that language. But I swear when I taught 1st grade, I did not really understand why we did calendar every day. I was 22 years old. It was fun. We took turns. They'd all come in and count and point and all those. I mean, I love calendar time. But it's because they really struggle with time, all children. My husband still struggles with on time, if that matters. So anyway, so that's important. I want you to understand that, okay? So one of the next things, we're almost at the end of the big things I think stand out, testing. Nobody likes testing, just so you know, not even the teachers who work in these buildings, not the principals. Nobody likes testing. They didn't ask us. There's various aspects to testing, though, that the law says you have to address at each ARD meeting. But all of it doesn't apply. So when my daughter was 3 and went to speech, not one piece of testing had to do with her, but yet it was in every IEP document I took home. So it just says NA, and we'd move on. So when I would hold ARDs for parents whose child was just there coming to speech, I'd say, and the next 3 screens are just about testing, not appropriate, your child's not even in school yet. It all says NA. Let's move on to something that actually matters for your child. Okay, I wasn't trying to dismiss and then not know what was on those papers, but we're already showing you enough. Wouldn't you at least like us to just show you what matters to your kid? And again, no one really likes anything that TA has to say about testing, so we don't want to talk about it if we don't have to. But there's 2 pieces to testing that the law says we have to address. You're talking about local type of assessments. You're talking about state assessment. So local and district assessment are things your schools just do. Anybody take the ITBS test growing up? I took the ITBS my whole life, and it was a norm reference test. Some children take something called the COGAT test we give. Have you ever heard the teachers or your kids say, oh, I have to take a CA tomorrow? They taught me a whole unit on matter, and now I have to take a unit test over it. That's the CA, middle school, high school kids talk about that. We're popular with MAP. Most kids have started the next round of MAP. Those are all local and district. That means the state didn't tell us we had to give any of those. But they're data collection points, they're good progress monitoring, they're universal screenings that help us track students' progress. it is one of those types of data that should always be looked at if you're starting that referral process and we are looking at where your child is compared to everyone else. This is data that is helpful. So it has a purpose, but we do a lot of testing. We know that. If your child's a second language learner, we also have to acknowledge that because of the state. So there's a test called TELPAS that they talk about in the paperwork. And the dreaded STAR. Doesn't start till 3rd grade. It never ends after that. It's horrible. We have to talk about it. Okay? So these are required by law, though, just so you know. So I gave you state and district assessment. Talks about STAR and the accommodations, and it just kind of breaks it down for you. And again, if your child's not in 3rd grade yet, you're just be grateful, right? You're just better off, okay? And then the last piece of the IEP that I think is important is the schedule of services, okay? And it covers a lot, but really the point of this is when and how much time will my child spend outside of general education, and or when will supports come into general education to help my child? So the first piece is the core curriculum. So this is always what kind of instruction is your child going to need to receive outside of the general ed classroom? Some children never leave the general ed classroom. Therefore, there'll be nothing on that, the first section, okay? And on the handout, I gave you one example by showing that this child's going to a reading class 30 minutes a day, okay? But sometimes that chart isn't even there because if we answer no, that chart doesn't print and it goes straight to the next part. So it's only if your child is needing direct instruction in special education outside of the classroom would there be anything on that part, okay? IEP services and supports. Things that this includes is inclusion. That's where we take the support to your child versus your child coming out. Many people say that obviously can be the most ideal, but remember what I said about LRE. Inclusion is a wonderful thing. I spend my whole life trying to make sure special education children are included. But it doesn't necessarily mean we have to include them during math instruction. Because if that's not where my child's going to be successful, and he's actually going to start acting out and be a behavior problem because he's now so frustrated, that is not really where I want one of my special ed babies included. Okay, so just think about that, okay? Things like adaptive PE, speech therapy, these services are not necessarily on a daily basis. But see, the first part, the core curriculum, if your child needs to come out, it is routine every single day for a certain amount of minutes that must be followed by law, okay? The IEP services and supports are not always direct instruction in a core academic area, so it's more about supporting the child's time in with core curriculum, but it may not necessarily be on a daily, everyday basis, okay? And then you also have related services, and this is probably one of the things that parents, I talk to parents a lot about, it seems like in this part of Garland where I work, because I'm fortunate that a lot of our families have been blessed to be able to afford private therapies. They all have private OT for an hour a week. It's wonderful. Their insurance pays for it. I'm extremely jealous that their insurance covers things like that. And we have OTs in school, but it's not the same as the private model, okay? And that is very hard for parents to understand, but let me tell you why. Private therapies are lovely, but you know what? They actually, as companies, can say, you know, our OTs each have 5, 10 full-time clients, and we can't take any more children. And so when you come and say, I'm looking for private OT for my kid, they say, well, we're full right now. We're not taking any new clients. Have you ever called a doctor that everybody recommended you just had to get into? And they say, oh, he's not accepting new patients right now. Of course he's not. He's popular. Everyone told me I needed to come to him. They get to turn you away, don't they? We don't turn children away in public education who have a disability and who need services. So there is that piece because everybody cannot get everything. But also, related services in the public sector is talking about how to support the child when they're accessing curriculum. And that's different than just a private OT that you go to once a week for an hour who works on strengthening their hand muscles. A lot of our OT, we have OTs, we have PTs, we have such a wonderful, they're really great. But this piece is really important. It's going to be about accessing the curriculum. And that's not something the medical model will ever use when they're talking, okay? So I'm gonna give you a really cool example of that. Child's blind and needs to be able to access the school building, right? So that she can move, like think about middle school. They change classes all the time, elementary they stay put more, but she can't access her school environment if she can't get around the school building independently, right? And so she might need special supports like orientation and mobility so she can get to where she needs to be safely. That is how, because she can't access instruction, she can't access curriculum if she can't get to her classes. But her mind works fine. She's got good cognition. She can learn the math like everybody else with accommodations, but she can't get to her classroom. Or she can't get on and off the school bus like everybody else because of her depth perception and those big steps on the school buses. Have you ever seen? I mean, well, if every other kid can get to school that way, then we've got to figure out how to help her be able to get to school that way because she can't access free and appropriate public education for all like every other kid if she can't get on and off that bus because, her parents work like everybody else's and she needs to ride that school bus to school. So do you see what related service there is? How she has to be able to access her environment. So a related service might be appropriate for her in that regard. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind, okay? So this is the last piece, and I don't have an example of this because there are so many of them, but there are extra pieces of an IEP. We call them supplements, and they are only included if your child needs them, okay? Otherwise, these documents will not be a part of the giant 42 pages we hand you, okay? But if your child has autism, the state of Texas, there's an autism supplement, so it's extra pages. If your child has medical needs and the nurse has to really be involved with your child, there's a skilled nursing supplement. My child never needed nurses services. There was never a nursing supplement in her IEP at the end of the meeting, okay? So these are just some examples. If your child's blind, there's extra documents because the state, there's a lot of stuff with children who are hearing impaired, children who are vision impaired, in addition to the normal. So they have supplements, okay? But you'll hear those words maybe, but it's also not like, well, why is yours 96 pages and mine was only 42? Okay, because I have literally given a parent 72-page ARD and I've given a parent 19-page ARD. So they're all different, just so you know, okay? I already kind of talked about the procedural safeguards. I held that up. We are supposed to offer you that. I used to say I would type in my minutes, parent was given their annual copy of rights. I've changed my wording and now I say parent was offered. Because most of the time the parents are like, do I actually have to take it? You've given me 6, Miss Robin. So now I've changed my wording and say the parent was offered another copy of their rights. Because most of the time they really don't want to take it again because we are giving this every year, that same document. And if it changes, we had good people at Harris Hill who let us know. And when it's changed and updated, they say, oh, we're going to shred all of them because last week it changed by law. And sometimes they'll even send us ones with a sticker that says, as of so-and-so date, page 4, paragraph 2 on the left side. Sometimes literally I've seen that we've had change where like one sentence changed, but our people who are all about the law and compliance tell us, we're only giving the new ones out. So we try to keep those updated and to make sure we're always with the law and anytime it changes. And it really does. They'll change 1 or 2 sentences and we start all over printing them again, okay? So there's a list of your rights. I think we've hit a lot of them, okay? I always make sure parents understand the last one about the right to revoke their consent. If we didn't believe your child needed special education, we wouldn't recommend it. And we only do that because that's really what we believe is absolutely necessary for your child to be successful. But in the end, you are the parent. And you get to make those hard decisions because I'm already making the hard ones for my kids. I want to make them for yours too. Right? It's hard to be a parent. It's hard to always know if we're doing the right things. And everyone has different opinions and views and experiences that we bring to that table. And a lot of stigmas maybe from when we were children and just so many things. But so I always tell parents it's our right, our responsibility to make sure you know you can always revoke consent. We don't advise it, or we wouldn't have him in special education, but it is your right. And that's important that you understand that, okay? And so just in closing, I want you to know I had another handout that they did have up there, and it starts with the title of IEP Binder. And I found some of these things that I just loved, because I often have parents say, what am I supposed to do with all this paper? And so I loved this because it literally broke down for parents how you could kind of organize all these documents. I like paper. I like paper. We can send these things, some of these things electronically to you now, and I hate that. I don't know why. I like paper. So I have, like I said, I still have my daughter's speech binder. She was in speech from, well, she started in ECI at 18 months, and she got dismissed from speech halfway through second grade. So I have a lot of years of speech IEPs on my own daughter. And my husband even said, why do we still have this on Riley? I was like, I don't know, but don't touch it. Okay? So anyway, so it breaks that down for you. And then I found some really just handouts I loved. Talks about those, the binder. I liked the parent school communication log. I gave all my all my special education teachers at Hudson this and said, it's just as important for us to write down when we call the parent as when the parent calls us. And we should be tracking that. So that I loved that one. So just some things like that. But the very end of it is, what are questions I can ask the child, or the ARD committee when we meet about my child? And I thought these were really good. How can I contact you? Things like that. That I had a parent the other day say, I said, why didn't you call us? And he said, oh, I didn't know it would be appropriate for me to call the teacher directly. He's from a different culture. He said, I didn't want that to appear disrespectful. I'm like, oh my God, you didn't call the math teacher? All you had to do was tell her. He was like, oh, I thought I should ask you first. I'm like, call your teacher. She wanted to know those things. So anyway, I just liked some of these handouts. And so I kind of put that together for you, that you might find helpful, or someone you know you could share. And I just think that those are important. And anyway, so that's probably it. It's a lot, isn't it? It's terrible. I'm really tired. I have 4 more of these tomorrow.
She always has energy. So that concludes her presentation. I know we are really close to 8 o'clock. We will be here for a few more minutes. I mean, if you have some pertinent questions that she wasn't able to answer, would you take just a few questions?
Yes, of course.
And then, again, if you have further questions, we have emails. Y'all can send us your questions. We're happy to answer those. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'm a professional, and I work in this school district, and I attend arts, and I know it's a lot. It's a lot. So, we want to try to help you, and you did a wonderful job, and she broke it down so well, and hopefully that was able to give you some insight into it. But it's a process. It's a process. And so be patient with yourself, be patient with your school, and know that they do have the best interest of your child. We just all got to figure out how to get there. So we will end this part, and then if you have some questions, please.